And I found a flight that got me to, I think it's called San Marinda.
Richard Gere married 3 times and dated Hollywood's biggest names. But in 2024, at 75 years old, he finally admitted the truth. One woman changed everything. She wasn't the supermodel he married with tinfoil rings in Vegas. She wasn't the actress he fought in court for over $120 million. And she wasn't even American. For her, he sold his mansion and left the country he called home for decades. The confession came quietly, almost by accident. And when he said her name, it explained every strange decision he'd made since turning 70. Richard Tiffany Gere was born on August 31st, 1949, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He was the second of 5 children raised by Homer George Gere and Doris Ann Tiffany. What many don't realize is that Richard's family lineage traced directly back to several Mayflower passengers. Names like Richard Warren, William Brewster, Francis Cook, John Billington, and Gregory Priest. That made him one of the few Hollywood actors whose bloodline was so deeply tied to America's earliest settlers. But the reality of his upbringing was more rigid than royal. His father, Homer, originally wanted to become a minister. He studied seriously with that goal in mind, but ultimately walked away from the ministry and chose a more stable path, working first as an accountant and then as an insurance agent. That shift from spiritual dreams to corporate reality left a kind of emptiness in the house. Homer served during World War II aboard the USS Aristeus in the Pacific. After returning, he used the GI Bill to earn a degree from the Wharton School, one of the most prestigious business schools in the country. He started with Atlantic Refining Company, and then spent most of his career at Nationwide Insurance, where he became one of the company's most respected agents. The family followed strict Methodist values, but Richard, growing up in that household, started asking questions that nobody had answers for. When Richard was 11, the family moved to Syracuse, New York. He started attending North Syracuse Central High School, and that's where things began to shift. He wasn't just another student. He was winning medals in gymnastics and composing original music scores for the school's theater shows. He could play the trumpet, the drums, and the piano. Most kids were trying to get through math class. Richard was writing entire musical arrangements while training as a competitive gymnast. He earned a full gymnastics scholarship to the University of Massachusetts Amherst after dominating state-level competitions. At the same time, he was carrying around a guitar he bought at 17, a guitar he would still own decades later. That guitar became more than just an instrument. It became part of how he defined himself. But under the surface of all this talent was a growing tension between him and his father. Homer's world was numbers, routine, stability. Richard wanted meaning, freedom, answers. That tension quietly pulled him in the opposite direction. Richard began secretly reading books on Eastern philosophy. He borrowed them quietly from libraries, careful not to let his parents know. He was supposed to be Methodist, but in the privacy of his room, he was devouring texts on meditation and Tibetan Buddhism. He read Sartre's Being and Nothingness without fully grasping it, but he felt something in those pages. He read Evans Wentz's translations on Tibetan thought and started wondering whether he could live a life that was both free and rooted in something deeper. It wasn't about rebellion in the traditional sense. He wasn't lashing out. He was digging inward, quietly, without making noise. By the time he graduated in 1967, he was already in a mental space far away from his family's world. Even though he had a full athletic scholarship, Richard stunned his family by walking away from it. He left UMass after just 2 years. He didn't want Olympic medals or a degree. He wanted something else, something he couldn't explain yet. He had been active in anti-war protests during college, caught up in the spirit of the late 1960s. When he dropped out in 1969, his father was horrified. Homer had spent his life building security, and now his son was throwing it all away for uncertainty. But Richard wasn't interested in conventional success. He wanted to create, to act, to understand life through stories and performance. He left for Seattle, taking a huge risk at age 20 with no formal acting training. Somehow, he landed a role at the Seattle Repertory Theater during the 1969-70 season. His first real performance was in Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. That role put him side by side with professionals, and he soaked in everything, watching, learning, absorbing. He also performed at Provincetown Playhouse in Cape Cod around this time. These jobs paid little, and he lived on the edge, barely covering his meals. But he was starting to feel his identity settle into place. The early 1970s were the hardest years. He lived like a drifter, moving from place to place, playing guitar on the streets to get by. He said later that his main meal was just eggs. Eating out wasn't even a possibility. He was broke, alone, and unsure of where the next gig would come from. That same guitar he bought as a teenager was now helping him earn just enough to keep going. It wasn't glamour, it was survival. But those hungry years shaped him. They taught him about people, pain, and resilience. That period would later fuel his humanitarian work and the compassion he brought into it. In 1971, he landed a role in a Broadway rock opera called Soon. It opened at the Ritz Theater, but was a disaster. The show closed after only 3 performances. He was crushed. Still, he didn't stop. 2 years later, in 1973, he got his first big break, playing Danny Zuko in the original London production of Grease. It ran for several months, and for the first time, he had steady income and industry respect. It wasn't just a role, it was a transformation. Audiences loved him. His stage presence, voice, and natural charisma finally found a platform. That time in London helped him save money, grow his confidence, and make plans for a return to America. Back in New York by 1972, he threw himself into acting workshops, some based on Sanford Meisner's methods. He learned to express emotion through movement and silence, drawing from his gymnastics background. He performed in countless off-Broadway shows, often for little or no pay. His meals were simple, but his dedication was total. These years turned him from a hopeful dropout into a serious, grounded actor. His rise continued when, in 1973, he officially led the London cast of Grease as Danny Zuko. Before that, he was an understudy in New York, covering 5 roles. One night, one of the leads couldn't go on, and Richard stepped in. He nailed it. The producers noticed. When the show moved to London, they asked him to lead it. It was his first time leaving the country. Opening at the New London Theatre, Richard turned heads with his performance. Footage from that time shows him singing Summer Nights with full energy. He was only 24, but people were already saying he had something special. In 1974, he joined the Royal Shakespeare Company and played Lucentio in The Taming of the Shrew. The role demanded sword fights, projection, and stamina. His athletic background helped him handle the physical scenes. Performing in venues like Regent's Park, he learned to balance Shakespearean technique with raw American instinct. The combination made him stand out. Working with British actors like Joan Plowright taught him nuance and presence. That experience gave him a classical stamp of approval, showing he could do more than musicals. His early years in theater weren't without controversy. During one performance of Grease, he allegedly improvised a kiss on stage and was fired mid-run. The tabloids had a field day. British press in the 1970s loved writing about American actors, especially those with bold instincts and good looks. Whether the kiss happened or not didn't matter. The gossip added to his growing mythology, a passionate actor unafraid to take risks. In 1978, he took on a monk-like role in a play reportedly titled Eckhart. While details about that play are scarce, it aligned with a real shift in his personal life. That same year, he traveled to Nepal and India for the first time. He visited Tibetan refugee camps and met lamas who would guide him in Buddhism for the rest of his life. His commitment wasn't a phase, it was deep and lifelong. He studied Zen and later Tibetan Buddhism, learning about universal compassion and inner freedom. Then came 1979. Richard starred in Bent on Broadway, playing Max, a gay man imprisoned in a Nazi concentration camp. The opening scene shocked audiences. He performed with emotional rawness and full frontal nudity. The story addressed Holocaust persecution of homosexuals, a topic still taboo in mainstream media. Richard visited Dachau as part of his preparation, wanting to understand the pain. The performance earned him the 1980 Theatre World Award and left a lasting impact. Anderson Cooper, who saw the play as a child, later said it helped him come to terms with his own identity. Richard's choice to take on such a role showed courage and conviction. He wasn't chasing stardom. He was searching for meaning and using the stage to find it. In April of 1975, Richard Gere made his first real splash on screen with a television pilot called Strike Force. It aired once and never became a series, but it mattered. He played a state trooper in a gritty crime story loosely based on the French Connection drug case. He had no experience with firearms and had to train hard just to look the part. The shoot itself was pure chaos. While filming a chase scene in Penn Station, an actual NYPD officer mistook Gere's co-star, Cliff Gorman, for a real suspect and tried to arrest him mid-scene. At the Fulton Fish Market, vendors demanded cash bribes just for the crew to film there, one shouting they gave $1,000 to the Godfather crew and expected the same. One even drove a snowplow straight at the cast. It was a crash course in both crime drama and real street-level filmmaking. A year later, in 1976, he played a secondary Marine Raider role in Baby Blue Marine, opposite Jan Michael Vincent. The film was set in 1944 and tried to evoke the feel of small-town America during World War II. They shot it near Mount Shasta, and the location work was praised, but audiences didn't come. It opened on May 5th and quietly flopped. The failure was sharp enough that Gere fired his agent afterward, convinced that he was being typecast in military parts. The film cost real money, but didn't earn it back, and it marked the last screen appearance of John Drew Barrymore, who vanished into reclusion afterward. Industry gossip even said Gere's performance outshined Vincent's so much that it basically ended Vincent's shot at leading man status. Then, in 1977, everything changed. Gere took on a raw, disturbing role in Looking for Mr. Goodbar. He played Tony, a cocaine-addicted hustler who seduces Diane Keaton's character. His method acting was so intense it scared his co-stars. Some said he barely came out of character between takes. The film was based on the real-life 1973 murder of Roseanne Quinn and didn't pull punches. It opened in just 110 theaters and still pulled in $1.54 million on its first weekend, eventually making $16.9 million total, which equals over $85 million today. The climactic scene was shot with flickering strobe lights to mimic the victim's final gasps, and it became one of the most unsettling moments in 70s cinema. The movie catapulted Gere into public consciousness, even if it also typecast him as dangerous. In 1978, Gere filmed Days of Heaven, directed by Terrence Malick. The shoot was grueling. They filmed near Whiskey Gap, Alberta, in real wheat fields under the Canadian sun. The cast worked 12-hour days, with most scenes shot during magic hour, that brief glow just after sunset, meaning the crew had only about 25 minutes of usable light each day. Gere got heat stroke during filming. Director Malick insisted on turning off prepared lighting, frustrating Hollywood technicians. The mansion wasn't a set facade, but an actual structure built in the middle of the wheat. Cinematographer Nestor Almendros was nearly blind and relied on Polaroid pictures to judge lighting. Still, the movie won an Oscar for cinematography. The cost was high, but so was the result. That same year, with his film career still uncertain, Gere left for Nepal with painter Sylvia Martins. He met monks, read a biography of the Dalai Lama, and visited Dharamshala in India. The spiritual trip changed his life. He adopted Tibetan Buddhism and the Gelugpa tradition. This wasn't a PR stunt. He came back different, more focused. The visit gave him the clarity to push for roles that felt authentic, leading directly to American Gigolo. Released in 1980, American Gigolo wasn't just a film. It was a career reset. Gere became the first major Hollywood actor to show full frontal nudity in a mainstream film, appearing completely nude by a window in a non-sexual scene. That alone made headlines. He also improvised the famous shirtless exercise scene while listening to Swedish language tapes. The movie cost just $4.8 million to make and grossed $23 million. Giorgio Armani created the wardrobe, launching an entire fashion movement. Paul Schrader, the director, designed Gere's character as the complete opposite of Travis Bickle from Taxi Driver. The film was a hit. Gere had finally arrived. That same year, he starred in a Broadway play called A Lesson from Aloes. It dealt with South African apartheid and sparked protests outside the theater. Some audience members accused the show of being political propaganda. But for Gere, it became the beginning of his real-life activism. He didn't just act, he started speaking out. In 1982, An Officer and a Gentleman took his fame to another level, but the romantic ending almost didn't happen. Gere thought the factory lift scene was too sentimental and refused to shoot it. Only after hearing the musical score, Up Where We Belong, did he agree. Behind the scenes, he and co-star Deborah Winger didn't get along. She reportedly called him arrogant. The final scene took 10 takes due to their tension, but the result became iconic. The movie cost $6 million and grossed $130 million. Then came Breathless in 1983. It was supposed to be a bold remake of the French classic, but it turned into a war between Gere and director Jim McBride. The script kept changing. McBride pushed for graphic nude scenes that weren't in the original agreement. Gere threatened to walk off the $13 million production. Filming paused for 3 days until lawyers intervened. They cut back on the nudity, but the damage was done. The movie earned just $19 million, and McBride never directed a big-budget film again. Things got worse during the Cotton Club. The film's producer, Robert Evans, was battling cocaine addiction and got entangled with criminals. Financing deals turned violent. Roy Radin, one of the backers, was murdered in a canyon. Evans refused to testify, facing prison time. Coppola took over direction. Gere played a mob-connected tap dancer and demanded rewrites. The $47 million movie bombed, but Gere survived the chaos. Then came Pretty Woman, originally offered to Al Pacino, who turned it down despite liking the script. The role of Edward Lewis eventually landed in Gere's lap. He almost declined again, until Julia Roberts slid him a Post-it note during a call with the director that said, "Please say yes." That moment changed everything. He accepted. The $14 million film made $463.4 million worldwide and sold 42.1 million tickets in the U.S. alone. Gere earned $12 million and ad-libbed the famous opera kiss. In Internal Affairs, also in 1990, he completely flipped his image, playing a dirty LAPD detective named Dennis Peck. He robbed drug dealers, killed for hire, manipulated everyone. During one brutal scene, Andy Garcia walked away with real bruises. Critics were shocked at how convincingly Gere played someone so dark. Around this time, a fake story began spreading like wildfire, the infamous gerbil rumor. It had no basis, but it stuck. Gere suspected Stallone of starting it after their falling out on The Lords of Flatbush, but Stallone denied it. The media ran with it, and late-night comedians joked about it for years. It became an urban legend Gere couldn't shake. In 1993, Gere tackled Summersby, learning a Southern accent over 6 months, to play a Civil War vet who might not be who he says he is. Tabloids spread rumors about him, and co-star Jodie Foster, though both denied them. The $30 million film made $140 million globally. The ending was reworked during post-production at Gere's request. Then came Primal Fear in 1996. Gere played a cynical defense attorney who slowly realizes his altar boy client is a manipulative killer. He rehearsed the pivotal outburst scene 50 times to make it perfect. The $14 million movie made $102 million, and Edward Norton became a star overnight. By 1999, he reunited with Julia Roberts for Runaway Bride. Production was a mess. The budget exploded to $70 million. Test audiences hated the first cut, so they shot extra scenes. Critics called it a cash grab, but it still made $309 million. But Gere's activism finally caught up with him. At the 1993 Oscars, he went off script and criticized China's treatment of Tibet. It wasn't forgotten. Hollywood became more reliant on the Chinese box office, and Gere was quietly pushed out. Chinese officials warned directors not to work with him. His 1997 film Red Corner, which criticized China's legal system, lost $30 million, Gere confirmed later. He was blacklisted. Even in 2000, tensions continued. On the set of Dr. T and the Women, he clashed with director Robert Altman over the nude lake scene. Gere was uncomfortable. Farrah Fawcett, on the other hand, insisted on shooting the scene with the whole crew present. The opening shot took 5 days and was all improvised. The smoke-filled sets gave Gere bronchial infections. In Unfaithful, he pushed himself again, playing a man driven to murder. Diane Lane herniated her neck during a kissing scene. The smoky atmosphere made both leads sick. Director Adrian Lyne was known for perfectionism, and the film required constant antibiotics on set. It still became a box office hit. For The Hoax, Gere transformed himself again. He gained 15 pounds, grew a mustache, and studied recordings of Howard Hughes. He played Clifford Irving, who fooled a major publisher into buying a fake Hughes biography. The movie hinted that the hoax might have influenced Watergate. Gere later said, "We all lie, just not always in ways that hurt someone." Richard Gere was 53 years old when he decided to learn tap dancing from scratch for a film. The movie was Chicago, and he had 3 months to prepare. Every day, he locked himself in a private room with his instructor. People outside could hear him shouting in frustration as he tried to master the steps. It became a joke on set. Whenever someone heard a loud outburst, they'd say, "Richard's working on his tap," but when the moment finally came to shoot his big number, razzle-dazzle, he didn't let anyone see him rehearse. He waited until the cameras rolled. 4 cameras ran at once, switching between reality and fantasy. The whole thing was done in just 2 hours. That performance won him his first Golden Globe. Not bad for a man who hadn't danced since childhood. 5 years later, he stepped into a stranger role. This time, he wasn't just acting. He was becoming one of Bob Dylan's many faces. In I'm Not There, Gere played an older version of Dylan through the eyes of a surreal Western outlaw. His voice had to change completely. He worked hard to match Dylan's growl. His scenes were shot like dreams, French New Wave, mixed with old Western grit. He wandered across strange landscapes, speaking lines lifted directly from Dylan's real quotes. The film used 6 different actors to show Dylan's shifting identity. It cost $20 million, but made only $11 million at the box office. Still, it became a cult piece, and Gere's part stood out for its slow, thoughtful tone. In 2008, he reunited with Diane Lane for Nights in Rodanthe. What was supposed to be a gentle romance turned into something riskier. They filmed during a real subtropical storm. During one key scene on the beach, Gere got injured. The waves were real. The rocks were sharp. He nearly drowned. The entire pier party sequence was shot with 400 extras, standing in real rain and wind. That same house on the beach was later destroyed by a nor'easter. But on set, Gere kept insisting on doing his own water stunts. You could see the storm in his eyes. Then came Arbitrage in 2012. At 63, he stepped into the world of billionaires, playing a man who could smile while hiding a $400 million fraud. He read deeply about Bernie Madoff and others like him, but the director didn't want a copy. So Gere shaped a new kind of villain, calm, collected, and dangerous. In one scene, he explains illegal loans without blinking. The camera never cuts. He had to stay in character through entire takes. Critics called it his best work since Chicago, but even though the film did well, it was mostly seen on demand. Still, it showed what he could do when playing someone whose life is crumbling from the inside out. By 2016, he took a sharp turn again, this time in Norman, a low-budget indie film about a lonely New York fixer. He wasn't Jewish, but he spent months learning Yiddish phrases and walking the streets of Manhattan to understand the culture. He even wore 6 layers of clothes every day during filming. Norman doesn't have a home. He carries everything in a single bag. You never see where he sleeps. Gere met real-life fixers from the Upper West Side, studying how they worked. It was a quiet role, with no glamour, just a man trying to matter in a city that doesn't care. The performance proved Gere still had something most actors lose with age: humility. Off-screen, his personal life was full of twists. He met Cindy Crawford when she was 22. He was 39. They got married in Vegas in 1991 using tinfoil rings. But Crawford later said she lost herself in the relationship. She tried to like what he liked, baseball, Buddhism, but it wasn't her. By 1995, they split. She walked away as she found her voice, just as he went deeper into his spiritual journey. In 2007, things got complicated in India. Gere kissed Shilpa Shetty on stage during an HIV awareness event. Trying to show affection wasn't dangerous, but the public didn't see it that way. He faced legal trouble, protests, and effigies being burned. A judge even criticized Shetty for not resisting. The case dragged on for 15 years before she was cleared. Gere had apologized early on, but the damage lasted. His second marriage was to Carrie Lowell. They were together for nearly 2 decades and had a son, Homer. But when they separated in 2013, things turned ugly. They fought over custody and property worth over $120 million. The Bedford Post estate alone was valued at $65 million. In the end, Lowell received about $33 million. Their spiritual differences, his Buddhist retreats versus her Manhattan lifestyle, pulled them apart. Between relationships, He had flings that filled headlines. There were rumors about Barbra Streisand in the early 80s. In 2014, he quietly dated Padma Lakshmi. She had just gone through loss. He was going through divorce. They tried to keep things light. It didn't last. Then he met Alejandra Silva, a Spanish activist 33 years younger. They married in 2018 and had 2 sons, Alexander and James, when Gere was 70 and 71. They lived in Connecticut, but by late 2024, they sold their $10.75 million mansion and moved to Spain. It wasn't for luxury, it was for love. He said Alejandra had given up a lot to be with him in the U.S., so it was time to give back. They settled in La Moraleja, a quiet neighborhood in Madrid, but adjusting wasn't easy. Within 6 months, there were talks of returning to the States. Still, they kept their family life private. No photos of the kids, just quiet posts from Alejandra, showing slices of their home. Behind the scenes, his foundation, created in 1991 to support Tibetan refugees, began to suffer. Hollywood stopped calling, not because he got worse at acting, but because he spoke out against China. Studios feared losing access to Chinese markets, so they quietly blacklisted him. He revealed all this in 2024 during a Senate hearing. One Chinese director told him, crying, that even speaking to him could destroy his career. Gere's foundation lost funding. His film roles dried up, but he kept going. In 2017, while visiting refugee camps in Nepal, he got sick. A cough turned into severe pneumonia. He was 68 and nearly died. Doctors said it was serious. He called it karmic exhaustion. Years of activism, travel, and stress had caught up with him. He spent months recovering, meditating, and learning to slow down. By 2025, things came full circle. He received Spain's International Goya Award, 50 years after his first movie. During his speech, he spoke not about fame or fortune, but about indigenous people, about Tibet, about children taken from their families. Over 1 million Tibetan kids, he said, were being forced into Chinese schools. He wasn't promoting a film. He was using the stage to fight for voices no one hears. And then came Oh Canada, a film about truth, aging, and death. It was his way of saying goodbye to the Hollywood version of himself. At 76, he no longer cared about red carpets or box office numbers. He cared about stories that matter. In interviews, he said he prefers home-cooked meals and time with his kids over power lunches in L.A. He's still acting, but now it's on his terms.